pervert. We're not going to give in to the demands of a vexatious litigant that has a sexual addiction from 20 or 30 or 40 years ago. We need to stand up and say, no, this law is good. Therefore, we need you to take us to court, and we're going to fight it. We're going to use our tax money to stand up for the children. Now, tell us what happened at the city council meetings. This was brought back for a first and second reading.
Yes, and we let them know. I wrote a 1,200-page response as to why this law was good, and
You mean a 1,200-word response?
I said yes, 1,200-word response, and graciously, you and Diane Hickey and myself, because we were only given 3 minutes each, provided that, gave that speech to the council, stating that the arguments given by Mr. Touchstone were in fact incredibly misleading, pointed it out over and over again that...
And once again, recap what was misleading about his arguments once again, because this is really important.
His arguments was that, in fact, the case in San Diego County basically was the same as our law. And it wasn't, because that was, and the wording is that they found a blanket restriction of sex offenders to be unconstitutional in this court level in San Diego. I think it's District 4 court, so it's a district court, District 4 court, which includes San Diego County. And they found that blanket restriction, residences for all sex offenders. They found it to be unconstitutional. As unconstitutional. The idea that limiting it to just child sex offenders has not been adjudicated or questioned in any court. So for him to say that he believed that our law was about to be thrown out as unconstitutional was a huge leap of faith, not based on the law. Now, I can't say to you 3, 4, 5 years down the road that California courts, which are the most liberal in the country, might extend that to our law, but it hasn't been adjudicated yet. So there was absolutely no reason for our city to do it. But they didn't care, because obviously it appears that they weren't really enforcing it in the first place for at least the last 3 years, because I couldn't find out who was enforcing it. They wouldn't tell me. Which leads me to believe that they wouldn't tell me that there was nobody enforcing it, because why wouldn't they tell me, share that information, unless they just never replaced him. And
so now they stuck a fork in the thing to finish it off.
Yeah.
And so
without a permanent police chief or permanent city manager to have a say.
And they did it at midnight.
Yeah, right after the election, because obviously this would have been hard to push through in October.
This came up for a vote at midnight last night, because I was there and so were you. Midnight, 12 o'clock on a work night.
Yeah.
So once again, Mr. Touchstone has taken it upon himself to try to sell the council members, hey, look, we got to ditch this thing, because our buddies down in San Diego just lost their shirts on the same thing, when in fact it's not the same thing.
No. Well, he argued that it was very similar.
Well, legally, being very similar does not mean equal, therefore.
No, obviously. But he was playing fast and loose. And then he had the audacity to read a statement in our law which says simply that a sex offender cannot live within 2,000 feet of a school, park, a daycare, I think, or a nursery. And he read that to show that our law wasn't.
But that's not what our law says.
But what he didn't read was the paragraph before, which was the listed definition.
That's correct. He didn't quantify or qualify.
The definition of a sex offender in our law was anybody...
Much narrower.
A sex offender who offends against a minor, somebody under 18 years of age.
Okay, so Mr. Levinson, in your opinion...
And he knew that because he was involved.
Well, he's a lawyer.
He was heavily involved in the amended version of it. And so, and he was the one who took the mantle of it. So I believe that was purposely misleading. And I find it abhorrent that my tax dollars spends hundreds of thousands of dollars every year for our city attorney to lie to the people of Fullerton. How dare they? It seems like all they are the puppets of the city council to rectify anything, whether it's true or not true, and to be another arm of the city council to get laws passed or repealed. And it's wrong.
There's so much here, Barry. I remember seeing a picture of our city manager having drinks with somebody who's a disbarred attorney.
Disgraced
Was he a
attorney
sex
and
offender?
judge. Yes.
So we had our city attorney having drinks.
It's my understanding he was, yes.
So we believe that our ex-city manager, Mr. Fells, was friends with a sex offender.
Well, I was having lunch with him.
Okay,
Just him and the
Mr. Levinson, have you ever had lunch with our city manager?
No.
I never have either, and we've been around City Hall for a number of years. It's kind of odd. Okay, so at the very least here, what we have Mr. Touchstone doing is trying to compare an orange and a banana, and trying to tell the council that has sunglasses on that they're the same.
And then read part of our law.
And leave out the first part of it.
Which gives one impression when in fact he knew that was not the impression. And shame on him. You know what? I don't know of a bigger, I don't know of, Dick Jones must be so proud that he hired such a sleazebag to do his dirty work.
I'm really shocked. Mr. Levinson, most people, they're not going to understand the depth of this until they really spend 35 minutes and listen to this interview. But this is a really serious issue because what sounds like to me is that you've done your homework, you've done your due diligence, you've gone to the mat, and everybody that is in a position of power and authority has turned their backs on the children. Nobody wants to fight for them. Nobody wants to stand up against these children being potentially violated.
And all the efforts by the city attorney, and any efforts by the police department, they were being paid for it. I spent hundreds of hours, probably thousands
on your
of hours.
own time.
I never got a dime.
They're on overtime, and the attorneys are getting paid, and so.
As a matter of fact, Mayor Chafee at the time, when I insisted and finally was able to get the city council, because and my wife and I were the ones who basically got the first law passed to help with the adjusting of it. I started to talk, and my 3 minutes were up, and Mayor Chafee wouldn't allow me to talk. And
as did Bruce Whitaker at the last meeting.
Yeah, as did Bruce Whitaker at the last meeting. But it's amazing
because you tried to point out the inaccuracy and the deception of Mr. Touchstone.
And Sharon Kennedy of the Fullerton Observer, editor for Fullerton Observer, who nobody would ever say she's somebody who likes me or is friends with me, at least mentioned that it was wrong of him not to let me speak. And then the other council member said, yeah, he's part of the process. You can't hold him to 3 minutes, let him finish.
And that was Mr. Chafee.
And that was Mr. Chafee.
I wonder about some of these people, I really do. Let's talk about Jennifer Fitzgerald. Jennifer Fitzgerald hangs out with these church people and went to some Christian university. Biola, I guess it's called, and she's on our city council. And I noticed her last night. She had her hand over her face the whole time this was being discussed. And she's a mother.
2 young kids.
And she even at the last meeting made a statement about how, this needs to be dealt with by the state legislature. But, young Kim was in office for 2 years. Mm-hmm. And young Kim and Jennifer Fitzgerald, I believe Jennifer Fitzgerald ran young Kim's campaign. I mean, these two are inexorably linked. I mean, they're connected to that big, what I like to call phony Christian church called Grace Ministries. In my opinion, they're a phony church because they're not doing anything about any of this either. But what did young Kim do about this in the legislature? Nothing. Sharon Quirk-Silva did nothing about this in the legislature. Bob Huff did nothing about this. Tim Dolly did nothing about it.
It's now over 10 years.
We've had a decade,
had this problem.
And not one elected representative is willing to go to the mat for these kids.
Not one is willing to go on the record saying there's a problem. Forget about fixing it. Just admit there's a problem and we need to fix it.
Well, all I can surmise by this, and I think it's time to put the camera on me, all I can surmise by this is that we've got people protecting pedophiles in our community. And we've got people protecting pedophiles in our state legislature. And ladies and gentlemen, you've got to protect your children. Now, I don't know how you're going to do that because you don't have custody or control over them while they're at school or while they're at the Little League field. I don't know what else to say except that I believe that God's going to judge these people, especially our leaders, because to whom much is given, much is required. You know, I don't like to quote scripture a lot, but I'm going to quote this one. Jesus said it would be better for a millstone to be hung around your neck and to be cast into the depths of the ocean than it would be to lead one of these little ones astray. Let me tell you something. When you rape a kid, when you violate a young child, there's a special place in hell for you. And you know, this is a rampant problem in our government leaders. They either enable, protect, or participate in pedophilia. And I'm here to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that I smell a rat in the city of Fullerton. And I smell a rat in our city government. And I have strong suspicions that we've got some very culpable and guilty people making some serious decisions for our community. And they're not your friends. Mr. Levinson has spent a great deal of time and effort out of his concern for the community at large. This was not a NIMBY issue for him. He took it all the way. Most people, when they have a problem in their community, they'll only react when it affects them at their house. Mr. Levinson's problem went away years ago, and he's still here fighting for your children. And we're going to continue to fight for your children, ladies and gentlemen. I'm calling for the resignation of Bruce Whitaker, Jennifer Fitzgerald, Doug Chafee, Jesus Silva, and Greg Seaborn. Effective immediately over what they've done. Because what they've done is they have turned their backs on the kids, and they have allowed the Fullerton residents and taxpayers to be maneuvered by Mr. Touchstone's fallacious deception that our ordinance is not strong enough to face a challenge. When it hasn't even been challenged, he's throwing in the towel when the opponent's not even in the ring strong enough to blow us over. This is criminal, ladies and gentlemen. And what is even more despicable is how no one has stood up for these children, including the clergy, including our own Congressman, Mr. Royce, who's supposed to be in charge of this child trafficking thing. Is he part of child trafficking? Why did they put him in charge of this human trafficking thing, and yet we've got massage parlors fully staffed by sex slaves all over the city? Why do we have a municipal ordinance that has been on the books for 7 years that has never been enforced and has been stripped away in the middle of the night on a Tuesday? Ask yourself these questions, folks, because we're going to start doing some digging. You know, Pizzagate's not a joke. This whole thing that went down in Washington, D.C., there is truth to this stuff. And you don't mess with children. And like Mr. Levinson said, a nation that doesn't stand up for its children will go to ruin. And actually, I believe we're halfway there. This is what you can do. You can contact Bruce Whitaker, Doug Chafee, Greg Seaborn, Jennifer Fitzgerald, and Jesus Silva at council@fullerton.org, I believe is their email. I believe that's the email. You know, go to the website and call these people up and ask them, are you perverts? Are you pedophiles? And if you're not, why are you protecting them? Because, and especially Dr. Pletka, there's a special place in hell for Dr. Pletka, in my opinion. Aside from all the stuff he's doing in the schools with the curriculum, with the Common Core, with the wireless, with all the agendas he's going along with, for him to put something like that out, to put everybody to sleep at a time of our children's most vulnerable moment, which is now, is despicable. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Levinson and I are not going to stop fighting for your children. And we need you to pray for us, and we need you to stand up to our leaders. And I'm sick and tired of people just talking about how their car got broken into on the next door neighbor app, or they're posting pictures of their cat or their flower garden. Ladies and gentlemen, our children are our heritage. They're our future. And if they're corrupted, and if they're destroyed, and if they're perverted, and if they're injured, and if they're abused, what do we have for our future? Please, open your eyes and get involved in this disaster. Thank you.